I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Today, we could not be more fortunate than to be joined by Dr. Shauna Birdsall, who is a naturopathic doctor specializing in oncology and who has worked for many, many years at the premier integrative cancer treatment center in North America. Now she serves patients in Alaska and spends part of her time in Nashville. Dr. Shauna Birdsall, good morning. Thanks so much for being here today.
Dr. Downey, thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, we've got great things we can learn from you today. And why don't we start with the type of work that you do so folks can better understand that. For me, there's no greater blessing than having folks that do what you do play this key role. So I've grown to be incredibly fond of and appreciative of having naturopathic doctors that prevent and treat cancer, but a lot of folks might not know this even exists.
Oh, you're so right about that. And thank you for the opportunity. You know, we're really an extension of the type of care that you offer patients. So for patients that are diagnosed with cancer, first of all, they're faced with a myriad of information and decisions, and probably directions that they now need to consider taking their care that they never thought that they would have to consider before. And it can be overwhelming and perplexing and very, very confusing. So the honor that I have in taking care of patients is helping them to walk through this journey and navigate, particularly for patients that were maybe always functionally minded in terms of the way that they cared for their health. You know, there might be a patient who is proudly a marathon runner. They're vegan. They avoid toxins in their environment, and they never thought that they would be diagnosed with breast cancer. And so to embark on this journey where they're undergoing testing and maybe being faced with chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, it's very frightening and quite honestly the antithesis of maybe how they were always living their life, right? Mm-hmm. Or it just might be simply, you know, a gentleman who's newly diagnosed with prostate cancer and doesn't know what to do. So I help provide care on the whole spectrum of that journey. I can certainly help patients translate this new confusing world with all of this terminology that they're hearing and help them along this decision-making process. But where I really can help the most is when patients are either preparing or starting their conventional treatment and looking at their diet, their supplements, their exercise, sleep, stress management, and looking at optimizing all of those areas very specifically to help them get through each step of the way, be it surgery or chemotherapy or immunotherapy or hormonal therapy or radiation. And then later on, helping them prevent recurrence, because nobody wants to have to face this again. And quite honestly, frequently cancer is a wake-up call, and people say, not only do I want to keep this from coming back, but I want to improve my health. And what do I need to do to help improve it? Or now I'm really worried that I did this treatment. What kind of impact does it have on my bones or my heart? And so since I have a background in oncology and integrative medicine, that gives me the opportunity to see through both lenses and know, hey, what supplements can you do during that particular chemotherapy drug regimen? What do you need to avoid because it could interfere with the effectiveness? How can we adequately take care of you during radiation, but let the radiation work and do its job? And so it's a real privilege to be able to partner with my patients and help them along this journey.
Fantastic. I want to mention a couple of things to our audience who I thank for joining us. And one is that Dr. Birdsall's experience is unique in that she spent so much time in a deliberately multidisciplinary setting. And so she's able to illuminate things for us that are somewhat rare in terms of the experts we get to talk to and spend time with, because she's seen the cases, but she's also seen the different team members put it all together in real time. And then another thing to know is just that patients I get to share with someone like Dr. Birdsall with her expertise do really well. They have great outcomes with their cancer, and they have great ongoing life experience, either living with cancer or being in remission, being healthy, being able to embrace that wake-up call and what have you. And as we segue into this next part, this is not secondary so much, but it's part I try to not focus on as much because I don't want to worry people or use fear as a motivation. But unfortunately here, there are things that people can do. And I use the term feed the monster, which is kind of an icky graphic term, but I am trying to get their attention. Things they've read about or learned about that might be wise or that they could get by with under other circumstances can really backfire with these cells and tissues that are behaving abnormally. Should we talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. Sure. So, cancer cells are just our own cells that have gone awry. And that's a challenge because in the best of circumstances, our immune cells are actually not recognizing our own cells and are thus not surveying for them and certainly not killing them. In a more concerning circumstance, our immune cells are attacking our own cells, and that's when we see autoimmune disease. And maybe we see Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, where the immune cells are attacking the thyroid gland. We don't want that, which is why we typically don't want to see our immune cells acting that way. But the challenge is with cancer cells. So cancer cells are our own cells that have likely undergone years of onslaught of various kinds of stressors that have eventually led to enough DNA or genetic mutations that have caused them to now become a cancer cell. And the type of stressors that they might undergo are, possibly, something as challenging as cigarette smoking. And we all know that cigarette smoking can increase our risk for lung cancer. But it could also be just a, 20 or 30-year history of high inflammation in the body, blood sugar that's become unmanaged, insulin that the cells have become resistant to, ongoing stressors in the body that have just kept cortisol levels up, maybe a sedentary lifestyle, maybe, somebody's a computer engineer and, like it or not, their job is sitting in front of a computer 8 or 10 hours a day. Maybe it's the standard American diet that we all know is extremely problematic. And so all of those little stressors can add up, cause mutations in the DNA, and over the years eventually lead to those cells now behaving abnormally, which means that they're growing into areas that they're not supposed to, that they're spreading throughout our body, that instead of going through something called apoptosis, where they divide about 60 times and die, they now are immortal. And those cells that are acting that way can form a tumor, start pressing on other structures, and now you have a situation where you have cancer.
And what are the things people do that are well-intentioned, but that potentiate or amplify this process rather than remedy or prevent it?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. I think all of us are bombarded by information, right? Most of us are on social media, and We get a lot of information, oftentimes maybe even conflicting from various sources. And you can almost go from, one concerning study to the next. And pretty soon you're kind of in a vicious cycle of becoming almost paralyzed as to what to do. You read that red meat causes cancer. So you think, all right, no more red meat. And then you hear maybe all animal foods cause cancer. So you're like, okay, at this point, I'm becoming vegan. And so maybe you're vegan, but now, your primary protein sources are frequently also high in carbohydrates. So maybe unintentionally, you're now eating a pretty high carbohydrate diet and you're becoming insulin resistant. Maybe you're gaining weight. And this is certainly, not what you had intended to do. And so you start taking supplements. And as soon as you start reading about supplements, then you also start kind of jumping from one thing to the next, right? And then you think, well, maybe I just need to do some sort of detoxification. So you start embarking on more and more strategies to detoxify or maybe become more alkaline. And pretty soon you've actually taken yourself from this place of, potentially not being in the best of health, but being on kind of a standard American diet and lifestyle, to now kind of going to the other extreme, and you've become orthorexic. You're terrified to eat. You're low in protein stores. So, your cells and your immune cells are not getting enough protein. You're actually ramping up maybe phase 1 detoxification, but maybe not phase 2. And now you actually have toxic metabolites that aren't being properly eliminated. And now maybe you took yourself in a direction that's not particularly helpful either.
So lucid. That just shines, that vignette shines a light, I think, for everyone interested. And Dr. Birdsall and I could go on for days of variations on the theme of folks that are trying to do everything right.
Right.
And so as we segue into the best food plan for anti-cancer, an editorial comment here would be that the dilemma here then is that this is a different critter because under normal circumstances, we kind of need to do one thing, wise things in alignment with our body. But with preventing and treating cancer, we need to do two things. We need to make sensible steps forward in a way that doesn't inadvertently, promote the amplification or unchecked progress of these cells or tumors. And so the rest of today, we're going to talk about what Dr. Birdsall has to teach us all about where the yield is. So let's talk food. How should people eat to prevent cancer?
You started with the most controversial topic.
Hey, we're keeping it real, right? We're going right at it. Everybody's ears will be perked up.
So when we look at the research, and this is a really interesting situation that we find ourselves in today. So when we look at the research, what we see is really the words plant-based diet, and that a plant-based diet helps us to prevent cancer, and or even helps us treat cancer. And I want to go into that a little bit deeper, and then I want to really broaden our view from that as well. Excellent. So when we go into it deeper, what we see is that plants, fruits and vegetables, really have a variety of what are called phytonutrients, which are compounds that work individually and work synergistically together to help fight off the tendency for various stressors on our body and toxins to cause DNA mutations. That's great. In addition, they help fight free radicals, which not only can lead to those DNA mutations, but as we all know, can lead to other kinds of things like atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease. And then they also can help decrease inflammation, which is this word we all know, but is really this insidious process that kind of develops over time, that really kind of means body on fire, and creates a pretty unhealthy environment for our cells. And furthermore, plant foods contain a lot of fiber, which helps to feed our gut microbiome, not only our gut microbiome, but other microbiomes in our body. And while we're still unraveling the full role that the gut microbiome plays in cancer, what we know from other studies on the gut microbiome is the gut microbiome seems to play a tremendous role on hormonal balance, on neurotransmitter production, and on our overall health. And so as we unravel the full effects of the gut microbiome, it behooves us to take action early and be innovators in our health, and really help focus on fruits and vegetables for the health of our gut microbiome to help prevent cancer as well. So that's the sort of microcosm or really specific view, if you will. Now, if we kind of span back and look at the kind of the macrocosm view, then it becomes a little bit more nuanced, contradictory, confusing, conflictual, because the real question is, do animal foods cause cancer, right? Because we're worried about that. We're worried, does dairy cause cancer? Does red meat cause cancer? What should I do? And because when we look at the titles of these studies, and frequently these studies are retrospective studies, meaning that they interviewed individuals, asked them about their diet, maybe took into account other lifestyle factors like smoking and drinking, and then kind of made observations and recommendations out of it. And so I think all of us would agree that commercially raised animals that have maybe been exposed to various chemical compounds, hormones, maybe growth hormone, antibiotics throughout the course of their lives, are not a good idea for our health overall. And that there's components of the way that commercially raised animals are brought up that can contribute to cancer. Same is true for dairy. So then we are still left with the question, okay, I know I need to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. What else do I do? How else do I eat? Do I need to be vegan? Do I need to be vegetarian? My answer to that, as I read the research, is no. And the reason being is that our bodies, are made of about 60% water and about 40% protein in the form of muscles and organs and other tissues in our body. We really desperately need protein. What I'm excited about for your listeners who live in Alaska is you actually have the best access to pristine animal products. You have wonderful access to wild caught, fish raised in the ocean. In the lower 48, that's something that we have to pay a premium for. You have access to wild caught game, caribou, moose, that have higher omega-3 content, lower omega-6 content because they're foraging. And then these days, it's much easier to access, grass-fed and grass-finished beef. There is research for some diseases like prostate cancer that point us in the direction of, hey, maybe more of a pescatarian diet, eating, more fish as a protein source is a better choice. But I would offer listeners that I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that there's still a lot of benefits that we get from animal-based protein if that's something that you choose to include in your diet, and not worry that it's causing cancer, which is kind of the big question mark there, if we're really conscientious about sourcing. Kind of further nuancing into that is still this question of, but what about red meat? And there's a couple of different thoughts. One is red meat and beef and pork. Some people are consuming large quantities of it as cured. So, the fun charcuterie boards that we might get where we have salami and other cured meats. Unfortunately, that curing process does create carcinogens, and cured meats are now considered class 1 carcinogens. And so I would suggest that if you are going to make a charcuterie plate, you can now get uncured meats, and that would be something to heavily consider. The other problem with red meat is when you grill it, the fun charring marks, those blackened marks, also contains some carcinogens. And so being mindful, if you're grilling your meat, about not taking it to the point where you get the fun crispy black edges is also an important consideration. When we span out further, we say, okay, but what about everything else? What do I want to think about wheat, gluten, other grains, dairy, fats, right? Mm-hmm. And there we get to some individual kinds of nuances where we all know in functional medicine that this concept of bio-individuality is key. What's good for one person is not necessarily good for another. Same is true with cancer. So if your system is reacting to gluten, that gluten is contributing to inflammation and other kinds of triggers that could form cascading effects that could eventually lead to cancer. So for one person, gluten may not be a good idea at all. For another person, they may tolerate gluten okay. I would still offer very careful sourcing of really anything that you're consuming, because everything we're consuming, with the intention of food as medicine, is actually the building block of all of our cells, which means that we need to be careful about it. Same is true for dairy. I don't love commercially sourced dairy, but if you're buying organic dairy, if you're, buying locally produced dairy and that they're not using hormones or bovine growth hormone in particular, then I think that that's something that you could include as long as you don't personally react to it. And then with the, whole realm of fats, we talk about healthy fats, but we're particularly concerned about these high omega-6 seed oils these days. Soybean oil, canola oil, which we used to think was heart healthy, safflower, sunflower oils. We don't need more omega-6 in our diet. And the process of producing those industrial seed oils can also lead to toxic compounds. So really making the decision to use extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, maybe you use ghee, clarified butter, coconut oil, nuts and seeds are all much better fat sources. So there's some big ticket items, eat more whole foods, eat more plant foods. And then there's the bio-individuality of eat also what your body well tolerates and thrives on.
Wow, that's just fantastically distilled. All of our Alaskatarians just breathed a big sigh of relief. And, and the number of them realized they get to keep having the sockeye and the black-tailed deer.
Oh, I would beg them to. Yes.
But they're going to need to take a look at the grilling and the curing. Yeah. So that's so often the case in functional medicine, that you get to have what you want and what you love, but there's a deliberacy and a thoughtfulness to it and an articulation of how we deploy these things, which is reverent to what our bodies are calling for, the way our bodies are calling for it. So awesome. Well, how about, given that you're clearly a monster slayer, how should patients determine which supplements are safe and appropriate? That's the next whopper, right?
Oh my goodness, sure is. That's another. You were just diving right into all the
your brain's gonna hurt by the end of this.
Well, let's start with the basics, particularly in the view of talking about Alaskans. We need to be getting our vitamin D tested. Everyone is well aware here that they're not getting a lot of vitamin D in the wintertime, and hopefully, in the glory days of summer, they sure are. And so really test, don't guess on vitamin D for sure is your most basic first step. And luckily, so well recognized these days, and any primary care physician will be happy to test it for you. Now, there's a bit of controversy over what the optimal range is and debate. We're still learning about that, but I would say at least offering, in the 50 to 70 nanograms per milliliter range would be considered very appropriate from a cancer prevention standpoint. Once we span out from vitamin D, that's when we get a little bit more bio-individual again, right? So one thing that I'm always cognizant of is, first food, then supplements. Sometimes we start diving into the rabbit hole of reading about sulforaphane, diindolylmethane, and indole 3-carbinol, which are really neat compounds that can help us metabolize estrogens, and sulforaphane has a variety of anti-cancer effects. But I love people to, first really make sure that they're upping their intake of cruciferous vegetables, before we start delving into the supplement forms of those foods. And not just because we tend to favor food first, supplement second, but because we're not always sure from the research if it's really those compounds only, or if there's other compounds in the cruciferous vegetables that are helping those particular chemicals work well for us. Many Alaskans do get enough omega-3s in their consumption of good sockeye salmon and those kinds of things, but not everybody likes salmon or eats it year round. And so, my next favorite supplement to consider after vitamin D would definitely be a good quality omega-3 supplement if you're not really consuming a good quantity of salmon and the less fun herring, mackerel, and other omega-3 containing foods on a regular basis. And that's because omega-3s have such strong anti-inflammatory effects in our bodies, and really just participate in a wide variety of functions. After we span out from vitamin D and omega-3, again, not such a sexy supplement, but magnesium, a lot of us are just deficient in magnesium. And part of cancer prevention is really optimizing physiological processes. And so definitely consider a good quality magnesium supplement, ideally not a citrate or oxide that's not well absorbed, but maybe a glycinate or one of those nice combination products that contain different forms of magnesium. And that's the intent of really kind of optimizing overall function of our bodies. There's a lot of controversy over whether or not a multivitamin is really necessary, required, and even more so, does it prevent cancer? Many of us are tempted to kind of fall in the crutch of, well, I don't eat enough fruits and vegetables, so I'm doing this as insurance. The research doesn't really support at least a kind of a Centrum daily vitamin as having that kind of benefit. But the question that your more functionally medicine-minded listeners may have is, but I wouldn't take a Centrum. Like, what if I was doing just a really high quality, optimal level type multivitamin? That's where there may be some additional benefit. And we can start to tease out some of the rationale. One is when we look at processes like methylation. Methylation is a process that's really heavily dependent on us consuming adequate, good quality B vitamins and folic acid. And many of us don't convert folic acid well into its more active form. And so that's when, considering maybe a B complex, maybe a multivitamin that has the active form of folic acid as additional consideration from a cancer prevention standpoint. And then we can start to get a little bit fancier and sexier. Fancier and sexier might be, considering a high quality turmeric or curcumin supplement. MD Anderson in Houston is a cancer institute that does a lot of good high quality research. And there's been a researcher there for years that has spent his career looking at the benefits of turmeric, or the compound in turmeric is curcumin. It's the yellow spice, and we might use in curries. And really, there are hundreds and thousands of different pathways that can lead to a cell becoming a cancer cell. And curcumin is fascinating in that it really interacts with a number of those pathways and helps to inhibit carcinogenesis and even cancer cell growth. So other benefits of turmeric or curcumin are that there's anti-inflammatory effects as well. Green tea is another interesting one in that we know from looking at studies in Asian countries that high consumption of green tea leads to lower cancer incidence. In the West, many of us don't consume high quantities of green tea, but if you don't and you like it, definitely a consideration. A green tea extract supplement that's high in catechins or polyphenols, which are compounds that have anti-cancer effects. In particular, a fancy one, epigallocatechin gallate, or EGCG, is a good place to look at the label and say, okay, does it have at least 40 to 80% of this compound? Is another good one to think about from a cancer standpoint. And then when we start diverging past that, again, it's really the individual, right? So you're hoping that they're working with a functional medicine or integrative medicine provider who's looking at their family history, their lifestyle, and looking at, okay, what are the areas that we could and should optimize with supplementation?
Wow. I'm just loving this. I'm so happy for our audience, because it's just such a great distillation. It's so gracious of you to summarize this for folks. It's so gracious of you to bless them with your experience. I'm just going to put a little blind up here. I feel like it's the scene in the movie where some angel or divinity shows up and there's like light everywhere. Morning in Alaska, which is for all of us who just came through this winter. Wow, it's spring's always so intoxicating. So I think that's just so powerful, that summary, and I don't have much to add because your articulation is so lucid, but I wanted to editorialize about one thing I see in my practice, which is I'll have folks come in who've gone to the other end of the spectrum, meaning they've kind of figured this out on their own. And it's frustrating for them. Anyone who shows up in my office for visit one with 25 supplements is not feeling well. They guaranteed are not getting what they want.
Yep.
And because the last 15 years plus have revealed the importance of B vitamins so much for mood, energy, mitochondrial support, et cetera, and developed this reputation for safety, the conversation I need to have with folks is that they can overmethylate, which can potentially potentiate cancer.
Yes.
And they're so discouraged, feeling like they were, again, trying to do the right sorts of things and going big. And so I kind of come all the way back to the father of functional medicine, Jeff Bland, saying the right amount in the right place at the right time. These are Goldilocks amounts we're talking about. And too many B vitamins can be just as problematic as too few. And so there's an elegance in getting it just right. And I also really strongly flashed on while you were talking that you can't supplement your way out of a lifestyle deficit. And so many,
No, no,
so
no.
many, folks are hoping, they're making kind of the same mistake conventional minded persons do, where they think, well, the right pills and I'm good to go. And
Yeah.
again, in functional medicine, right supplements, I'm good to go, doesn't pan out until you make a lifestyle play. But thankfully, you don't have to be an Olympic athlete or a guru or a monk. You just need to get engaged, and start loving the process and learning, and then good things happen, I think. Do those things sound reasonable, or is there any of that I got wrong?
Oh my gosh, you're preaching to the choir. And I was actually just doing a bit of self-reflection as you were speaking, because normally I say, all right, let's really talk about the big movers and shakers when it comes to. The cool thing about this is not just cancer prevention, it's your health in general, prevention of all the other, big scary things we don't want, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's. Is our bodies were meant to move. We don't need to worry about whether cardio is good for us or not good for us, or any of those things. Move every day, move multiple times a day. We can finesse it and fine tune it, once you're doing it, but just move. Dance around your house if there's a snowstorm outside. Go for a walk if, you can do so, and get out in nature, get some sun exposure. But move. Eat. Eat from the bounty of amazing foods that nourish our bodies, and avoid the risky behaviors of smoking and too much alcohol, but also ultra processed foods and sitting too much. And so as you were speaking, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I would have backtracked, answered your question, and in a much more articulate way. And thank you, Dr. Downey, for actually distilling it into what's most important, which is food and lifestyle first. Supplementation is really kind of the top of the pyramid of what you need to do to improve your health and prevent cancer.
This is going to be such a powerful resource. So we've asked a lot of you today, but given that you're clearly got the superpowers, let's do two things before we wrap up. What are the 5 things people diagnosed with cancer should focus on?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. One is a slowing down. Sometimes, you get diagnosed and you feel like you just need to jump into things. And once in a while you do. Once in a while, you have a very urgent situation that needs to be handled immediately. But most of the time, slow down and get information and get, your first opinion, get a second opinion, build your team. You get to be surrounded by experts who are going to give you knowledge and resources and really lift you up in this process. So you get to have your conventional oncology team and your integrative team. So first of all, slow down, get information, get educated, put your team together. Second of all, don't think that that you need to jump into buying everything on the internet, taking everybody's advice for this particular herb that cured, your neighbor's dog of liver cancer. Radically, changing your diet so that all you're doing is juicing, and get back to those basics. Get back to, all right, what can I do today to start increasing my fruit and vegetable intake, making sure I'm getting, a good source of protein and some healthy fats, and taking a walk and moving my body. Those things are not as alluring as maybe looking at, starting a whole, regimen of 25 different supplements, but they'll do your body more good than those supplements. But third of all, find a knowledgeable practitioner that can guide you in those supplements, because you don't have unlimited financial resources to spend money on everything, nor should you be. And two, some of those supplements, while well-intended and maybe high quality, well-researched, could actually be interfering with your treatment, and really need to think in phases and think about, okay, what do we do during this phase of treatment versus the next phase? And number 4, get some good quality sleep. Sleep is one of the most underrated tools that we can use. That's when your body rests and repairs itself. Your body desperately is going to need sleep so that it can recover and be strong during cancer treatment. And then number 5, I would say, don't forget to have all of the social connections and joy in your life, because sometimes people forget to start living or continue living. They put that on hold. And actually what studies tell us is that social connection, fun, joy, all of those things are actually what helps carry you through that treatment and helps you get to the other side.
So beautiful. It's just so beautiful. It's such good news. Well, we had set out today to potentially wrap up with steps people can take to prevent cancer, but I think we did that right before the 5 things. I think we talked about lifestyle. Are there any insights you've developed over these 20 years plus that you've done this that you didn't get to share today? Anything you'd love for people to know?
Wow. I would love for people to know that the good news is that any and every step that we take to improve our health will help us fight cancer. So maybe, you're working with a functional medicine practitioner and you're like, gosh, wait a minute, should I switch gears? Should I not be working on my high cholesterol and my mold toxicity and my high cortisol levels? No, you should, because taking away those stressors is going to help your body prevent the development of cancer. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Continue to work on your health like you have been.
Terrific. Well, there's kind of a remarkable situation in Alaska in that, and again, I know you'll correct me if I have this wrong, but my perception is the folks I'm referring to you're affiliated with Radiation Oncology Center with serving folks in Soldotna and Anchorage during the week a month that you're here. And it seems like my patients that see me through insurance are seeing you in the same fashion. Is that accurate or not?
That's accurate. Anybody can make an appointment and we'll figure it out with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So many Alaskans rely on insurance, and a lot of functional medicine is cash pay. So you and I are both sort of outliers in a way that
Yes.
Puts this within reach for a lot of Alaskans. Where can people find you, Dr. Birdsall?
Absolutely. So if they're local to you, I'm at Peninsula Radiation Oncology Center, which is in Central Peninsula Hospital in Soldotna. In Anchorage, I'm at Anchorage Radiation Oncology Center, and you can just Google that. And then when I'm in the lower 48, I actually do telemedicine for all over through norrishealthcenter.com. And I'd just be delighted to just be connected, answer any questions, and help in any way that I can.
So gracious of you to give all of us your time today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for what you do and all the light you bring.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.